What's cracking, fellow Mandos? Alright, I haven't seen a single episode of the show. I'm Arthur and you're watching Guitar But Easy. In this series we're striving to produce arrangements for solo guitar that boil down pieces to their essential components without adding any other over-the-top technical hurdles to them. But at the same time, we believe that making an extremely easy arrangement missing integral parts of the piece does not achieve what a solo guitar piece is supposed to. Therefore, our arrangement will always aim to contain bassline, chords and melody in order to transport as many of the original piece's nuances as possible while still being playable. Written by Ludwig Göransson, who records his music at home, just like us. This is Mandalorian, but easy. To be honest, I really didn't have a good grip on this piece when I started to transcribe it. I just didn't know the music very well, and there were some factors that made the decision which key to choose a little harder than usual. So I decided to first transcribe the piece in its original key, so that I can later lay out all the benefits and disadvantages in order to make an informed decision. The intro is very straightforward at first. The melody that the single flute plays sits well on guitar. It's when the other flutes come in that you have to start getting creative. The flutes are a little bit detuned and it's hard to hear what exactly is going on, so I try to hit the feeling of what you can hear instead of trying to pinpoint every exact note. I think my rendition reflects the feeling, although it can't really be called easy. But it seems like there's no way around it, or at least I can think of an easier way that will still convey the nuances of this segment. At last, there's still the question of how to handle the echo in the original piece. There's always one bar of the flutes playing and then another bar of a repeated echoing of the last two hits of said first bar. One could either ignore the echo and have an empty bar in between, making chord switches easier, while having the disadvantage of leaving an empty bar. Or you could just choose a more atmospheric approach by playing the echo out. As you can see, I chose to keep the echo in order to stay close to the original. I also always try to leave some agency on the people who try to play our tabs, leaving it up to them to remove elements that might be hindering. In the beginning, there's just this fast bass figure that lands on a C on the first beat. There's some percussion going on in the original, which I'm gonna try to incorporate later on. I'm already thinking about the possibility to copy the rhythm of the percussion in the bass note instead of having it just lie there. But right now I'm just trying to make some progress in the verse without changing too much about it. Just so that there's some raw material from which I can make such decisions later on. The first melody that sets in is played by a guitar, although the bass line is played by the strings. This makes the bass line a little weird to play. For example, the one line going from F to G sharp is very inconvenient and practically close to impossible while the other stuff is supposed to go on in the melody. Because of this, I think I'm going to transpose the piece a half step down later on, in order to match the convenience of the open strings in the bass and melody, which will then go from E to G. But we will wait for now, first of all because it's easier to transcribe the original key, and secondly, because we will be able to make a much more informed decision after transcribing more of the piece. The brass melody that sets in at bar 25 is already setting a counter-argument to my first transcription idea, because of the open G that is prominent in the melody, which would lose to an F sharp, which is on the 4th fret and would be much less convenient. Bar 29 changes things up a bit with its triplet cascade ending in a C minor chord. At first I transcribed the melody of this part so that I have a basic understanding of the rhythm and narrow down the harmonic possibilities, so that I would have an easier time with figuring out the bass line. Although finding the basses in bar 29 and 30 was not easy, but with some time I think I got it right. The version I came up with is not yet playable. Right now I'm just transcribing and leaving playability questions for later. Next, the chorus is played for a second time with only minor changes in bar 36. At first, I just transcribed the melody, which posed some small problems like the sudden use of a 2/4 bar in bar 45, but otherwise it was pretty straightforward. Next, I started transcribing the basses, again posing the question which key to use in the end. For example, the middle voices chiming in at bar 50 are begging us to stay in the original key. Also, bar 43 would feel kinda sad if we were to transpose the piece a half step down, like the first verse of the piece strongly suggests. This would make the E playable in an open string into an E flat, making it very unsatisfying. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I only left out the last 2 bars because I was very unsure about the basses there. After the initial transcription was finished, it was time for the big decision: which key to choose. To lay out the framework again, the first part of the playthrough would work better 1/2 step down, mostly because of its bass line, although the melody would also suffer a bit from being transposed. The second part would profit from staying in the original key. After some pondering, I actually went with the 1/2 step down solution. I know it doesn't seem reasonable to sacrifice so much just for some basses, but I think they are a too integral part of the piece to be disposed of, and the melody still stays playable, although becoming a little inconvenient. So now I was gonna track through the piece again after playing around with it for some time on my guitar to try to find playable solutions for a new key. As you can see, the verse works pretty well now, with lots of open strings in the basses and the melody, although the F sharp in the melody is a loss compared to the open G we had before. The first real decision now is concerning bar 30, which is not at all playable. At first I tried to find a fingering for the melody that would reduce the amount of hand movement around the fretboard. I found a solution where the first 3 notes form a triad in the first position, while the second 3 notes form a triad in the 6th position. This seemed ideal to me, since we only need a single jump and the 2 resulting chords can be fretted with minimal hand movement. Because the notes are on 3 different strings, you can just lay the chord down and the right hand does the rest. Now we can assess which basses are realistic. Since the first of the 2 triads has 2 open strings, I left the basses as they are in the original version. But when we move to the 6th position, we take advantage of the E on the open string and just let it ring instead of playing what would actually come there. I think this is a good solution, since we wouldn't have been able to play the basses while fretting the chord in the 6th position, but now still have an harmonically fitting accompaniment. The last note would be pretty important, since we stay on that for some time before moving on to the now B minor chord. The original bass there would be the 5th to the following chord, so an F sharp. But since that would be a pretty big stretch, I took a hit and made it a B flat. The same note as in the melody, taking away some musical depth, but still making the moment sound fuller while being conveniently playable in the 6th position. The next big decision would concern the following 2 bars and as a result the entirety of the second verse. You see, the problem is that immediately after the B minor chord, another version of our intraflute melody starts. This makes us choose between the chord, which should be held, and the melody, which wouldn't be easy on top of it, although doable. In the end, this conundrum just made my decision to cut the section and the second verse to which it leads as a whole a lot easier. I was already thinking about this possibility because of the lack of new material in the second verse, and I wanted this arrangement to be as compact as possible. So now the first verse immediately leads into the second part of the arrangement. My first action there was to move everything in the melody an octave down in an attempt to make the whole second part playable in the first position. This worked out pretty well. We are still mourning the loss of our E bass in bar 43. Our solution sadly has a second fallout concerning voice movement. In the original piece, this bass would go up 1/2 step in the next bar. But since it would then interfere with the melody, we now have to go a 7th down, giving us an open E string, which is nice, but also sounds very inconsistent. It's definitely not wrong to do something like this. One should just know that inconsistent jumps like this should generally be avoided and only used if necessary. Next on the agenda are the middle voices in bar 50 to 52. These can actually stay, as surprising as that is. They fit pretty well into the framework of melody and bass, even without being played on open strings anymore. To round it all off, I transcribed what I believe to be the middle voices and basses of the last bars, and added a rhythm to the basses in bars 17 to 20, which would bring us to a close on this one. Thanks for staying till the end, I hope you enjoyed the video. If so, consider liking and subscribing for more guitar arrangements. If you're interested in playing the piece, check out the playthrough, which is linked on the screen right now and in the description, along with the tabs. Thanks for watching, see you in the next one.